19-year-old Charles Starkweather took 11 lives, while 15-year-old Nehemiah Griego wiped out his entire family.
I am sorry for taking our parents and our kids.
Teenagers can be more heartless than you can imagine.
I swear to Almighty God, I never killed any of them. I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry it happened.
Forget about the cute, pitiful, and innocent faces that you see here and there. Some of them are real, cold-blooded killers.
Get me out of state. That's what I want to do.
If you haven't heard about a teenage serial killer, or you think the one you know is the craziest, brace yourself, as we are about to show you the most brutal teenage mass murderers. Let's begin with Charles Starkweather. His story is one of the craziest in American history. Charles took 11 lives in a brutal fashion, and the craziest part? He was just 19. He took his killing spree across Nebraska and Wyoming, committing mass murders within 2 months. With him on this evil journey was his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, who was also an alleged accomplice. See, if you had the chance to meet with Charles, you wouldn't have suspected he was anything close to evil. He was an ordinary American heartland boy, but a monster on the inside. The truth is, according to people who knew Charles, he was never known to be a cold-hearted serial killer. He was only known as a third child of Guy and Helen Starkweather. Ever since he was born on November 24, 1938 in Lincoln, Nebraska, he was only seen as an adorable little boy until he had to visit a hell called school every day. Charles's family gave him the little that they had, but what he got at school was just the direct opposite. Because Charles was slightly bow-legged and had little speech impairment, he was mercilessly bullied. In fact, he was so badly taunted that as he grew older and stronger, he found a physical outlet in gym class, where he channeled his ever-growing rage. This rage grew inside of him daily, and by the time he was a teenager, he was like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Eventually, Charles could no longer cope at school. He had to drop out to work at a newspaper warehouse to pay his bills. It was while working at this job that he met Carol Ann Fugate. At the time, Charles was 18 while Carol was 13. According to Nebraska's law, the romantic relationship they had going on was arguably predatory, as the age of consent in Nebraska was and is 16 years old. But when there are butterflies in the belly, who cares about legality, right? Soon, the two became close, and Charles quickly taught Carol how to drive. Carol, who was not good at driving, yet crashed Charles's father's car, and for that, Charles was punished with banishment from the home. Charles needed more to survive, so he took on a job as a garbage collector. During pickups, he'd plot out robberies on homes. But his real criminal streak didn't begin until November 30, 1957. On that fateful day, Charles tried to purchase a stuffed animal from a local gas station on credit. When the young attendant refused, Starkweather robbed him at gunpoint and then took him out into the woods where he shot him in the head. Right, that was terrible. But his next murder was even grislier. On January 21, 1958, Charles went to call Carol at her home to go out with him when he was confronted by her mother and stepfather. The two adults didn't like Charles, so they warned him to stay away from Carol. Charles only responded to their warnings with gunshots, and as if that was not enough, he went on to strangle and stab Carol's 2-year-old half-sister to death. While it remains unclear if Carol was in support of her family's murder or not, we do know that she was present throughout Charles's subsequent murder spree that lasted throughout January 1958. After murdering Carol's family, Charles took Carol to her family friend 70-year-old August Meyer and shot both him and his gun with a shotgun. He then tried to run away with Carol in his car, but as they drove, they got stuck in the mud until two teenagers, Robert Jensen and Carol King, stopped to help. And how did Charles reward them? You guessed right. He shot Jensen to death and then attempted to forcefully get intimate with Carol, but he shot her to death as well. Their next stop was at the home of industrialist C. Lauer Ward. After stabbing his maid, Lillian Fenkel, to death, Charles killed the family dog, then stabbed Ward's wife, Clara, to death when she came home. He finished up by fatally shooting C. Lauer Ward. They robbed the house and haphazardly searched for a new getaway vehicle. While searching, they found Merle Collison sleeping in his Buick just outside of Douglas, Wyoming. To get his car, Charles fatally shot and killed him. But Collison's Buick had a brake mechanism that was unfamiliar to Charles Starkweather, and as a result, the car stalled when he tried to drive away. A passing motorist, Joe Sprinkle, stopped to try to help, and an altercation ensued. When Starkweather threatened Sprinkle with a gun, Natrona County Sheriff's Deputy William Romer showed up. Upon seeing the deputy, Carol ran to him and identified Charles as the murderer. Charles roped her into a high-speed chase with the deputies, but eventually, he gave up when a bullet shattered his windshield and cut his ear. That day, Charles was only arrested for the murder of Jensen because his other crimes were still hidden. He willingly chose to be extradited from Wyoming to Nebraska because he believed that prosecutors wouldn't seek the death penalty. After all, the governor at the time was against execution. But for Charles, the governor changed his tune. After Charles changed his story severally and accused Carol of pulling most of the triggers, his lawyers also said he was insane. But the jury bought none of it, and he was ultimately convicted of murder and sentenced to death. The state of Nebraska carried out his execution, which was death via the electric chair, on June 25, 1959. He was buried in Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln, Nebraska, where 5 of his victims are also buried. Carol Ann Fugit's story, however, ended a little differently. Throughout her trial, she maintained that she was Charles Starkweather's hostage and that he threatened to kill her family if she didn't follow him, not knowing he had already killed her parents. She added that she was too terrified to run away while he drove her around on his killing spree. The judge ruled that she had ample opportunity to escape and gave her a life sentence on November 21, 1958. After 18 years, she was paroled on good behavior and changed her name to Carol Ann Clare after marriage. Although it's been decades since Charles committed this mass murder, his name and infamy live on in books to this day. It's crazy how Charles wiped out the entire family of his girlfriend, but what's crazier is the case of Nehemiah Griego, the 15-year-old boy who killed his entire family. You see, most times the homes where delinquent kids were raised get blamed for their influence in the child's life. But that's not the case with Nehemiah. He was born to Greg and Sarah Griego in 1998, and he had 1 brother and 2 sisters. Greg Griego was a pastor who had once served at Calvary, one of Albuquerque's largest Christian churches. He was also well known throughout the law enforcement community for his work as a voluntary chaplain. Everybody knew Greg as a peaceful man, though he was a gang member in the past before he changed his life after he found Christ. According to the neighbors, there was not a time when they had seen police cars outside the Griego's home except for January 20, 2013. Soon, the road was blocked, and word of the shootings in the home began to make its way through the neighborhood. Everyone was shocked as they began to wonder what was going on. After inspecting the crime scene, the victims were identified as 51-year-old Greg Griego, 40-year-old Sarah Griego, and 3 of their children, Zephaniah, Jael, and Angelina, who were 9, 5, and 2 years respectively. It soon became clear that the only surviving member of the family was Nehemiah, who had already told a staff member at Calvary that his family was dead and that he placed the 2 rifles in the family van as protection before driving to the church. When Nehemiah was asked if he told anyone else about the death of his family, he mentioned that he took a picture of his dead mother and sent it to his girlfriend. Soon, the police began to suspect Nehemiah, and it didn't take long for him to confess. He mentioned that he was angry at his mother and had suicidal thoughts. For that, his mother was his first victim. He shot his mother around midnight with a rifle, which was loud enough to wake Zephaniah. After Zephaniah saw that his brother had killed their mother, Nehemiah turned to him and shot him with the same rifle. Next, he went into the bedroom shared by his 2 younger sisters, who were crying, and fatally shot them each in the head. At the time, Greg was not yet home, and so Nehemiah waited patiently for him downstairs. Around 5 a.m., Greg came back from work and was welcomed with multiple shots from an AR-15 type semi-automatic rifle with a scope. He then drove to church, with 2 rifles in the van, and sent a picture to his girlfriend saying that his family was killed in an accident. The pastor received news that something was wrong with his father. When Nehemiah got to church, he met a pastor who asked about his father. He told the pastor that his family was dead. The pastor and another church member got into the car to check on the family, but on the way, they called 911. During the interview, Nehemiah said he had intended to drive away, murder more people, and die in a gun battle with police. Because of his age, Nehemiah was classified as a minor at the time of the crime. Under New Mexico law, minors charged with first-degree murder are to be tried as adults. However, persons who are minors when a crime is committed cannot be sentenced to death or life without parole. By January 2015, the case was at a standstill due to several complications, including mental health evaluations of Nehemiah Griego that were underway. In October 2015, Nehemiah Griego pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of child abuse resulting in death. As he was a minor at the time of the crimes, a family court judge proposed to sentence him accordingly. On February 11, 2016, Judge John J. Romero of the New Mexico Children's Court determined that, based on mental health evaluations, Nehemiah was amenable to treatment and would be sentenced as a juvenile. This would mean that Nehemiah, then 18, would likely be released from a youth detention facility when he turns 21. But unfortunately for Nehemiah, that never happened. In August, Judge Elisa Hart filed a 75-page order in the 2nd Judicial District Court that reversed the order of the lower court to have Nehemiah be sentenced in juvenile court. She found that at age 22, he was not amenable to treatment or rehabilitation in available facilities and believed that he should not be treated in an unlocked facility. She said he is to be sentenced as an adult. Eventually, he was ultimately sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences plus 7 years to run consecutively, with the life sentences with credit given for the 6 years and 285 days already served, and in all must serve 30 years before being eligible for parole. Nehemiah Griego is currently imprisoned in the Lea County Correctional Center where he is facing the consequences of his actions. But while Nehemiah had no reason for killing his family, Tyler Hadley, a teenager, killed his family and hosted a party almost immediately. It was around 1:15 p.m. on July 16, 2011, when Tyler Hadley, a 17-year-old living in Port St. Lucie, Florida, posted a status on Facebook that reads, "Party at my crib tonight, maybe." Shortly after Tyler's post, he realized he had just one problem: his parents. Both of them were home, and since Tyler was recently grounded for drinking and using drugs, they definitely won't allow him to throw a party. Some of Tyler's friends knew, and so they didn't take him seriously. One of them asked if it was happening for real, and Tyler replied that he wasn't sure, but he was working on making the party happen. Unknown to his friends, Tyler was going to hatch an unimaginably evil plan. By 8:15 p.m., the party was on. Tyler posted again on his wall to confirm, "Party at my house, hit me up." When one of his friends asked, "What if your parents come home?" Tyler responded, "They won't, trust me." Tyler was so sure that his parents wouldn't disturb his party because ghosts can't disturb a party, can they? Tyler had already murdered his parents at this time and was already throwing a party at the crime scene when their bodies were barely cold. You see, Tyler had always been a troubled boy. His parents have been worried about him for years. They'd taken Tyler to a psychiatrist and turned to a substance abuse program for help, but nothing worked. So when Tyler drove home drunk one night, his mother, Mary Jo, took away his car and phone as punishment. Tyler fumed and told his best friend Michael Mandel that he wanted to kill his mom. Mandel brushed off the statement as something an angry teenager would say. He never thought Tyler would go through with it, but on July 16, Tyler made a plan. First, he took his parents' phones. That way they couldn't call for help. Then he took some ecstasy around 5 p.m. because he couldn't go through with his plan sober. He then found a hammer in the garage, which he used as his weapon. While Mary Jo sat at the computer, Tyler stared at the back of her head for 5 minutes. Then, he swung the hammer. Mary Jo turned and screamed, "Why?" After his father, Blake, heard the screams, he ran into the room. Blake echoed his wife's question. Tyler shouted back, "Why the F***K not?" Then Tyler beat his father to death. After killing his parents, Tyler Hadley dragged their bodies into their bedroom. He cleaned up the crime scene, tossing bloody towels and Clorox wipes onto the bed. Finally, he invited his friends over for a party, and by midnight, more than 60 people had shown up at Tyler Hadley's house. None of them knew that the dead bodies of Tyler's parents were in the other room. High schoolers played beer pong in the kitchen, rubbed cigarettes into the walls, and urinated on the neighbor's lawn. At first, Tyler tried to stop the teens from smoking inside, but eventually, he relented. Later in the night, Tyler pulled aside his best friend, Michael Mandel, and said to him, "Mike, I killed my parents." In disbelief, Mandel responded, "No, you didn't, Tyler. Shut up. What are you talking about?" Tyler insisted they were dead as he showed Michael that their cars were in the driveway. Michael still couldn't believe it. Then Tyler told him where he was hiding their bodies. That was when Michael finally believed that his friend had killed his parents. Michael was really disturbed, but he kept it cool to avoid suspicion. He didn't leave the party right away. In shock, he took a selfie with Tyler, figuring it would be the last time he would see his friend. After that, he left the party and called Crime Stoppers at 4:24 a.m. on July 17, 2011 to report the murders. Police rushed to the Hadley house. When they arrived, the party was still going on, and Tyler claimed his parents were out of town and refused to let police in the house. But they made an emergency entrance despite Tyler's protests. The police found beer bottles all over the house. Unrolled cigars littered the floor, and the furniture had been tossed around. They also found dried blood on the walls. When police forced open the bedroom door, they found dining chairs and a coffee table tossed on the bed. Under the furniture, they discovered the body of Blake Hadley. Nearby, they also found Mary Jo's body. Police arrested Tyler Hadley for murder, and 3 years later, a court sentenced him to life in prison. It is really disturbing to know that Tyler was not in any way sorry for what he did. Maybe because of the ecstasy or the party, he was in a good mood till the police arrived. He even posted one more time around 4:40 a.m. on Facebook. "Party at my house again, hit me up." If the police hadn't shown up, Tyler would have considered taking his life, maybe after the party. He had a stash of Percocet pills hidden in his room, which he wanted to use. But now, he just needs to stay alive to serve his punishment. Now, it's time for today's subscriber pick. In a world where teens are classified as children finding their way through the uncertainties of life into adulthood, some of these teens have chosen a dark path. As we dig into the books of the most brutal teenage mass murderers, we realize that even the darkest of souls may live within the weakest bodies, and the most gruesome thoughts may exist right behind the most innocent faces. These teens leave us to question if most teenagers ever have the chance to enjoy the true meaning of childhood. As we bring you more teenage mass murders, what do you think turns an innocent child into a cold-blooded killer? Let us know in the comment section. Next is Harvey Miguel Robinson. We can actually say Harvey's problems originated from the influence of his father. Harvey's father was an alcoholic who physically and emotionally abused Harvey's mother till she eventually left the family. His father won't stop being abusive. He continued with his mistress, Marlene E. Perez, whom he eventually beat to death with a blunt object. When the police got to Perez's apartment, they said she was nearly unrecognizable from the merciless beating. Perez was found naked on the sofa of her York apartment in December 1962. From the appearance of the external injuries or contusions, York police speculated that the weapon was a piece of furniture in the apartment. When Robinson was questioned, he said he went to Perez's apartment and found it locked. He and another man broke in and found Perez dead. The man who was with him told the police a different story. He said he saw Robinson strike Perez in the head and knocked her to the floor where he kicked her several times. Robinson Sr. was 32 when he was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 6 to 12 years in state prison. When charged with murder, Robinson was a drummer performing at a New York nightclub. The defense lawyer for Robinson Sr. and the judge in that case told him that he was fortunate to only be convicted of voluntary manslaughter. The district attorney had sought a first-degree murder conviction. Despite everything, Robinson Sr. protested that he was innocent. Despite Robinson Sr.'s abusive nature, Harvey loved and worshipped his father. Harvey started being delinquent early in life. He entered the juvenile system for the first time at the age of 9 when he was caught shoplifting. He continued committing petty crimes throughout his youth, and in 1989 he was sent to a residential reform program after being convicted of assault. Years later, Harvey Miguel, who was 17 years old, was convicted of savagely killing and forcing himself on 3 women in Allentown. Most believe that by idolizing his father, Robinson was more likely to accept and commit murder. He assaulted and murdered 29-year-old Joan Burgart in 1992, 15-year-old Charlotte Schmoyer in 1993, and 47-year-old Jessica Jean Fortney. Between the murders of Burgart and Schmoyer, Harvey was arrested for burglary and served 8 months in prison. After the murder of Schmoyer, he was almost apprehended when he was pulled over for a speeding violation, but he received his speeding ticket and left. He also attempted to kill Denise Sam Calley, who fortunately survived the attack. Another victim was a 5-year-old girl that Harvey Robinson stalked for days. He broke into her home, forced himself on her, choked her, and left her for dead, but she survived. Sam Calley managed to break free of Harvey Robinson's grip and run outside. Harvey attempted to attack her again, but she fled. Eventually, the police used Sam Calley as bait to lure Harvey to capture him. A shootout erupted between Harvey and a police officer, Brian Lewis. Harvey fled, but he was wounded. He went to the hospital, where he was traced and arrested. In November 1994, Harvey Robinson was sentenced to death for his crimes. As of April 2006, Harvey Robinson's execution had been stayed. He was later sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Joan Burgart because he was 17 when the crime was committed. On December 14, 2012, Harvey Robinson agreed to waive his appeal rights in the Schmoyer case in exchange for a life sentence. In December 2013, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld his death penalty in the Fortney murder. In October 2019, a Pennsylvania judge urged Harvey Robinson to consider donating his brain to science, saying it was the only gift he could give. Currently, he is serving time at SCI Phoenix. Last but certainly not the least on this list is Craig Price. Price started committing crimes as early as 13 years old when he committed his first murder in Warwick, Rhode Island, on the night of July 27, 1987. Price broke into a home that was only 2 houses away from his own, took a knife from the kitchen, and stabbed 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer 58 times, leading to her death. A little over 2 years later, Price was a 15-year-old freshman in high school when he murdered 3 other neighbors on September 1, 1989. Price, high on marijuana and LSD, stabbed 39-year-old Joan Heaton 57 times. He also stabbed her 10-year-old daughter Jennifer 62 times as she witnessed Price stabbing her mother to death in the kitchen. He also crushed the skull of Joan's 7-year-old daughter Melissa, who also witnessed Price stabbing her mother and sister, and inflicted 30 stab wounds on her. The stabbings were so brutal that the handles broke off the knives he used, with the blades staying inside the bodies of the victims, including a knife blade lodged inside of the neck of the 10-year-old girl, Jennifer. At the time, the brutality of the murders was mostly unknown due to Price's sealed records. According to law enforcement officials, Price had no remorse when confessing to the crimes, and as for the motive, Price himself claimed racism by white people beginning when he was a young child was a factor, and that the first time he wanted someone to die was when a group of white adults allegedly shouted racial slurs at him and tried to run him over with their car when he was a young boy. After he was arrested a month before his 16th birthday, Price calmly confessed to his crimes, and he was tried and convicted as a minor. By law, this meant that he would be released and his criminal records sealed when he turned 21, and Price bragged that he would make history when he was released. The case led to changes in state law to allow juveniles to be tried as adults for serious crimes, but these could not be applied retroactively to Price. Rhode Island residents formed the group Citizens Opposed to the release of Craig Price to lobby for his continued imprisonment, due to the brutality of his crimes and the opinion of state psychologists that he was a poor candidate for rehabilitation. However, Price was not released due to a series of crimes he committed behind bars while he was held at the Rhode Island Training School. Even while incarcerated, Price didn't change his ways. He was charged with additional crimes, including criminal contempt for refusing a psychological evaluation, extortion for threatening a corrections officer, assault, and violation of probation for fights while in prison. He was sentenced to an additional 10 to 25 years, depending on his cooperation with treatment. According to an officer from the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, Price has been booked twice for fighting since leaving the adult correctional institutions in Cranston. In 2009, he was denied parole, and his release date was set for May 2020. Price has never been remorseful. He continued his bad ways, and in 2004, he was transferred from Rhode Island to Florida to serve his time due to his violent tendencies. In July 2009, Price was involved in another prison fight. While trying to break up the fight, one of the correctional officers was stabbed in the finger by a handmade shiv in Price's possession. In the wake of the prison fight, Price was transferred to another facility. In his new facility at the Suwannee Correctional Institution in Live Oak, Florida, he stayed out of trouble for a while, but on April 4, 2017, he was accused of stabbing fellow inmate Joshua Davis with a 5-inch homemade knife. And again, on January 18, 2019, he was sentenced to 25 years for the crime. At this point, it doesn't seem like Craig Price would ever get out of jail if he continues this way. What do you think? Let us know in the comment section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.